this one. We're hitting up OSP after quite some time, and it is Trope Talk Haunting the Narrative, which is a trope that I am quite a fan of. It's, I think, probably most famous in A Song of Ice and Fire with Ned Stark. I'm trying to think of some other stories in which that is, and I can't think of any off the top of my head. I'm completely blanking on them. Haunt the Narrative. I feel like Evan Winter sort of has this with Tao's father in a way. Tao's father kind of haunts the narrative somewhat, but not to the degree that like Ned Stark does. I can't really think of any outside of Ned Stark. I've done this. I pull. I think my most recent novel I did this. But let's go ahead and hear Red's thoughts.
You know, I feel like we as a culture have kind of lost sight of what a ghost really is. First point of order, I don't personally believe in ghosts. I don't think there's any sort of tangible supernatural emanations from beyond the veil that cause spooky happenings in their proximity. My working theory is that death is the end of it, and the ripples in the world you leave behind are the only ghost you can expect to deposit. What I do believe in is being haunted, because that's not supernatural at all. That's fully internal. I believe that after you lose someone or something, everything in the world that reminds you of what you lost aches like an open wound.
I agree entirely with Red.
You'll catch glimpses of them in familiar places because you expect to see them there, and the world doesn't make sense in the same way without them in it. You'll see a stranger move like they did, or laugh like they did, and it'll hit you like a truck. You'll want to text them about the news in your life, because you always told them about that sort of thing. They won't be there to do what your mind says they should be doing, but they're in your head, and they'll shape the way you see the world because you'll remember how they shaped the world around them. Human memory is associative and largely uncontrollable. When you lose someone, they'll persist in your memory everywhere you expect them to be. That is being haunted. No ghost required. In fact, I think this is where the modern concept of the ghost almost harms our understanding of what a haunting is. In modern stories, being undead is basically just another way of being alive. Vampires may be different than they were before they got turned, but they'll still be people with thoughts and feelings and all their old memories and the potential for character development. Zombies are less glamorous and more unsanitary, so they're still usually portrayed as mindless, but thinking zombies with memories and personality are absolutely a thing that shows up. And ghosts can range anywhere from a shadowy echo of who
I've seen this movie. Oh.
they were in life to a full continuation of the exact same person they used.
Yeah, I don't like how Rise of Skywalker and Last Jedi did it too. I don't like the portrayal of the Force Ghosts there. I wanted the Force Ghosts to be more just not so interactive with the world.
Used to be. Stripped of the innately evil, unholy implications that they had back in the Dracula days, undeath is just more life now. Characters don't have to die, they can just change form. And narratively, I don't hate this reframing of the undead. I like unpacking the concept of monstrosity, and honestly, it's always good to take any worldview that could be used to reclassify real human beings as inhuman monsters that must be destroyed for the good of all with a hefty shot of salt. So this is kind of wins all round. I spent some time in college reading up on historical vampire lore, and it's truly alarming how many of the diagnostic criteria for it are just a new guy in town who seems a little weird. Modern ghosts are capable of growth, change, and guidance. They're characters in their own right. They can return from death to provide information and closure to the living. But classical ghost stories didn't really do this. Ghosts didn't give closure, they were a sign that something needed closure. A classical ghost story is rooted in an unanswered question or an unresolved injustice or an old tragedy that will never be healed because the participant is too dead about it. If a ghost is a character who can grow and change and answer questions and explain things and do stuff, then their presence isn't a haunting, it's just a story they're in. A ghost doesn't capture the feeling of being haunted because we aren't haunted by presence, but by absence. There's someone who isn't here, and they won't let us forget it. That's what makes it a haunting. So today,
Man, Red is so smart.
let's talk about what it means to haunt a narrative. Haunting the narrative is an old turn of phrase that's recently been given a new spark of life by getting picked up in online fandom spaces. Its definition is a little bit uncertain, though, and without even a TV tropes page to guide us, it's been thrown around a bit haphazardly in places. Now, far be it from me to lock in an ironclad meaning for any part of the English language, but my favorite definition I've encountered so far is this: a character haunts the narrative if the story can't work if they're around. More broadly, the character's
I have done this. Yes. I did do this in my most recent finished book. That I am querying. God, I really want something to get published, for fuck's sake.
Absence is what drives the narrative. Now, this is a little bit suspiciously similar to another trope I've gone on the record about disliking, that, of course, being fridging, which is when a character, frequently a love interest, parental figure, innocent child, or other loved one, is horribly abused and/or unceremoniously killed to drive their aggrieved protagonist into action. Fridging, when it was coined by writer Gail Simone, was initially an observation about how frequently the female characters in superhero stories would find themselves life-derailingly wounded or dying tragically to make the superhero more upset during their standard issue big battle of the day. A symptom of the prevailing attitudes among the writing teams that were pretty blatantly uninterested in the lives, potential, and internality of these people, and saw them instead only as interchangeable accessories in the lives of the guy on the front cover whose pain was what really mattered. So when we say that a character's absence drives the story, how is that different than killing the hero's girlfriend to make him want to punch the bad guy appropriately hard? Well, first and foremost, the difference is that in order for a character to haunt the narrative, the other characters need to actually care about them.
Yep.
And while the fridged character is ostensibly cared about to the extent that their loss motivates the important people to get upset, a large part of why fridging is weak writing is that once the character is dead and the angry punching is over, they're usually quickly forgotten as the story moves on to new frontiers. The trope fridging is named after the bit in DC Comics where Green Lantern Kyle Rayner's girlfriend is murdered by the villain Major Force and stuffed into a fridge for him to find. Do you remember the girlfriend's name? I don't. It's Alexandra DeWitt. I had to Google it. She's not even the most memorable name in the trope about her own murder. When a character haunts the narrative, it's not their death that matters. It's their absence. It's the open wound left behind in the narrative as the characters around them grapple with not having them there. In order to haunt, their presence needs to have mattered in the first place. When a character is fridged, avenged, and then forgotten, it's pretty clear that they didn't matter beyond the initial shock and outrage at their death. They didn't leave a mark on the world except by that time they left it. Meanwhile, a character who haunts the narrative is entirely characterized by how the world is different without them in it. So when we say a character is haunting the narrative, we're being led to understand who they were by observing the shape of the wound they've left behind. And while we're name-dropping related tropes, there's something of the noodle incident.
Hey, we've seen that video before.
About the character who haunts the narrative. While the noodle incident is typically comedic, some off-screen shenanigans that we only hear the barest details about, the underlying structure of the trope can be very easily applied to serious contexts, which is a frequent element of environmental storytelling. Rather than showing the audience something directly, the audience is only shown its aftermath and is left to extrapolate what they can from the limited information they've been given. When a character haunts the narrative, this principle is applied to the rest of the cast. Rather than seeing the character directly, the other characters in the audience mostly only get to see the impact they've had. There's often an overt sense of longing baked into the story here. The idea that if this haunting character could just return, even briefly, if they could just explain themselves or lend their aid or help, they could fix everything. Which is, of course, exactly why they can't. If they aren't gone, they can't haunt. This is why, ironically enough, characters that are ghosts almost never actually haunt the narrative. There's too much closure inherent in their
Trying to think of an example to... Yeah, she's right. She's leaving me with nothing to fucking say.
presence. Now obviously, a character who's haunting the narrative has to have a very limited, tangible presence in the story, which means if we want to unpack their role in the story, we can't really focus on them. A character haunting the narrative is mostly understood through how their absence affects and motivates the other characters in the story.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, it's got a
And
point.
with that much ambiguity, there's a lot of room to play around. First of all, the million-dollar question. Is the character haunting the narrative well and truly irretrievable, or is it possible for them to come back?
Yeah,
In
Ned
many
Stark's
stories,
dead.
this uncertainty is part of what's haunting the narrative. A character who's missing presumed dead is a much more painful question mark than a character who's dead, and even that's not a guarantee. Sure, in a more grounded setting, a dead character is probably out of the story for good, but in a fantasy story, it's completely plausible that a dead loved one could be resurrected with some complications and a few tribulations along the way. Consider Dungeon Meshi, which starts off with the party healer Fallon getting fully eaten by a dragon, and the rest of the party is like, oh shit, well, better get back in there so we can resurrect her before she's too digested. While Dungeon Meshi is strongly in line with the genre conventions of fantasy adventuring party narratives, which can, as a rule, be somewhat blasé about death outside of cutscenes, the first stage of the story still has a bit of uncertainty and worry hovering over the rescue and resurrection of Fallon. Killing the dragon is gonna be really hard. Getting through the dungeon region alone and undersupplied with no dedicated healer is an additional challenge. And if her body's completely destroyed in the meantime, they straight up won't be able to get her back. So there's an uncertain time limit hovering over the party's quest to find her before she's fully digested. She's a real Schrodinger's cat situation. She may or may not be dead forever, and that's dependent on how quickly they can get to her. And the people in the party who love Fallon more than anything are constantly thinking about her, reminiscing about her quirks, missing her pertinent skills when they're in tough fights, remembering the last time they fought this monster of the week with her, comparing notes on their past with her, wondering how she'd feel about the situations they're in. They miss her because she's not there right now, but there's this looming, haunting worry that maybe they should be missing her a whole lot more in case it's already too late. This same ambiguity follows her through the story, especially after spoiler alert for this part, although frankly, if you manage to avoid the massive amount of fan art spoiling this plot twist, I'm genuinely impressed. She's successfully revived by the party, and then transformed by the Dungeon Lord into a replacement for the dragon they killed.
Oh.
This new Chimera Fallon is an entirely new painful ambiguity for the party to figure out, because she doesn't actually seem to be Fallon but a dragon now. Fallon likes them, and as a rule isn't on board with killing people, but this giant monster wearing her upper half seems a-okay with it. Is she being controlled? Is she still in there? Is she aware of what's happening? If they kill and revive her again, will the same thing happen? If they kill the Dungeon Lord, will that be enough to save
I'm gonna have to watch that one.
her? Is she gonna have a giant dragon for a bottom half forever? Schrodinger's cat is back on the table. She's gone right now, and she may or may not be already gone forever. You may have noticed that fantastical settings can contrive far more ambiguous fates than just being dead, and that can contribute.
We are combining so many of the previous trope talks into this video. We've gone into Noodle Instant. We've gone into Frieren. Now we've got fate worse than death.
Viewed heavily to how haunting a haunting of the narrative really is. Perhaps a little surprisingly, given the aesthetic and tone, the poster child for uncertainly haunting the narrative is Steven Universe, where the entire story is set in motion by Steven's mom, Rose Quartz.
I'd say, I don't know, I feel like Ned Stark is more, maybe that's just because of my bias, but I feel like Ned Stark's a bit more recognizable. I mean, I feel like Ned, in terms of when this trope is mentioned, in the fantasy context, I feel like Ned Stark is mentioned more than Steven Universe. Yeah, it's just why I interact with
Quartz sacrificing her form to have a baby that carries her gem. This is an entirely new, unprecedented idea, and nobody knows what it's going to mean. Gems typically can't die, since their bodies are decorative and reform quickly if destroyed. If their gem is shattered, that's extremely bad for them, but their individual body parts can still manifest out of the pieces, and a diamond's power can stick them back together again. As an attack, the diamonds were able to release a power that corrupted several gems by damaging their minds and turning their bodies into monsters, but that's still not dead, and it turns out to be reversible. Steven Universe presents a smorgasbord of fates worse than death, but death, an actual permanent ending, isn't really a thing for the gems. So when Rose Quartz grows a whole baby who inherits her gem and her powers, the question haunts the other gems. Is Rose Quartz still in there? If they just...
I'm so lost. I did not watch Steven Universe. I think it came out at the part where I was like no longer watching like Cartoon Network because of how old I was.
Took the gem out of the baby, could she come back? This uncertainty is only part of why Rose Quartz haunts the narrative in a uniquely painful way. One kind of fascinating element of the story format is that, as an audience, we see Rose Quartz's character development in reverse order. The version of her we first hear about is the person she was at the end of her life. Kind and saintly to the point of being absolutely beloved and revered by her friends. Powerful, beautiful, loving, could do no wrong despite clearly believing she was deeply flawed and personally responsible for the weight of the world. For everyone but Pearl, this is Rose Quartz, the only one they've ever known, and they miss her presence and her leadership while Steven feels like he has this impossible role model to live up to. But as the story continues and we learn more about the diamonds, we get the first big reveal, which is a spoiler if you're worried about that sort of thing. Before she was Rose Quartz was Pink Diamond, the fourth and youngest of the Diamond Authority in charge of all gems, the very thing the crystal gems were in rebellion against. She was tasked with ruling Earth and turning it into a gem colony, but fell in love with the planet's life and, convinced that she could never change the other diamonds' minds because they didn't listen to her, reformed herself into a rogue warrior fighting for the planet's freedom, against herself and the rest of the Diamond Authority. Despite this still being a well-intentioned and broadly heroic act, it shatters the vision of her that the other gems believed in, and because Rose Quartz is gone, she can't explain herself or soothe the blow or in any other way provide closure to the friends who are now reevaluating thousands of years of trust and friendship with.
Okay, but I'm gonna disagree with this. But here's the thing, though. She like it's not like she betrayed them. She joined their side. Like if like, I don't understand how that makes it a problem.
With her. And this is also rough for Steven, who's gone from seeing himself as a cool magic dude with cool powers to just another way for his mother to run away from her problems and leave someone else holding the bag. If Rose Quartz were an easy, simple character to categorize, she wouldn't be such a haunting presence. The version of her we're introduced to at the start was very too good for this sinful world coded, but when we learn about her past as Pink Diamond, we see her when she was immature, impulsive, trapped in an abusive cycle with her family, and prone to run away from anything she wasn't sure how to confront directly. She was a compassionate leader and a good friend, but she also left behind a lot of bad stuff, and she chose to have Steven and stop existing in the process before she actually cleaned up most of those messes. If she were just secretly evil, everyone could feel betrayed and move on. And if she were just the saintly version we're initially introduced to, the characters could just do some grief counseling and also move on. Because the story is anchored on a character full of secrets who everyone has extremely contradictory feelings about, and because she's really genuinely gone and can't help or explain herself in any way, she ends up as an open wound on the story, which is a big part of why I think she's so compellingly tragic. The one thing we really know about her is that the longer she lived, the more she tried to do the right thing, and the more sure she became that the only way forward for her was to sacrifice herself to create someone entirely new. Because she could never confront her problems head on, they all piled up in her legacy, and now everyone who loved her has to grapple with the consequences and the resentment that she left her messes behind. Her absence puts an unresolved question mark on the story, and nobody knows how to deal with it. It's incredible narrative haunting work. At this point, it might seem like the only way for a character to haunt the narrative is for them to leave behind aching, unanswerable questions that torment their loved ones. But circling back a little to the nature of grief, despite the ache, grief is not unilaterally bad feelings. Losing a person, missing them and what they brought into your life, that's always going to be sad. But grief is memory. It's carrying a person with you. It's the indelible mark they left on you from when your lives were intertwined. In some stories, grief is a gift, and personally, I've never seen it done better than in Frieren, Beyond Journey's End. The story of Frieren starts at the end of a 10-year journey to destroy the Demon King, the stuff that JRPGs and
I think she has talked about this one before. Can't remember.
7-season anime series are made of. Our party of heroes are celebrated throughout the land for their legendary achievement and reminisce together about the good times and how strange it is that their time on this adventure is over. But one of the party members, Frieren, the mage and the only elf in the group, doesn't really see what all the fuss is about. After all, the quest was only 10 years long. She's spent far longer than that working on tricky spells or practicing techniques. It was a good journey, but it wasn't a big deal or anything. This is less than 1% of her entire life. At her suggestion, they agree to meet back up in 50 years' time to watch this meteor shower together again, and then they go their separate ways. 50 years later, oops, that's a long time for humans, and Himmel the hero has shrunk into an anime senior citizen. Surrounded by his friends and loved ones and reunited at last with his old party, he peacefully passes away as the stars fall overhead. And so Frieren realizes that because she was so used to having all the time in the world to work on projects, she neglected to consider that her time with these people was limited. Connecting with people is hard and confusing, and she didn't figure that out until it was too late to connect with him. This is approximately how I was pitched the show the first time I heard about it, and it sounded like an enormous crushing downer. She figures out the power of friendship at her dead friend's funeral when it's too late to do anything about it? What the hell? But then I actually watched it and it wasn't like that at all. The running theme throughout the show is not that Frieren is too late to realize her friends loved her. It's that her friends loved her the whole time, and that love is built to last. They knew she didn't operate on the same timescale they did, and they knew she was going to figure things out at her own pace, quite probably after all of them were dead. But as Frieren retraces the steps of her old journey with the heroes party, she remembers the time she spent with them and sees new meaning in their old memories. As an audience, we really only see the heroes party, and specifically its leader, Himmel the hero, in that very first scene leading up to his funeral, and then through flashbacks Frieren has on the journey. Everything we learn about Himmel the hero is through Frieren's memories of him, and he seems like a really interesting, fun dude. Kind of a show-off, likes commissioning statues of himself from grateful towns, very invested in side quests to save people from harm no matter how small or inconvenient, extremely supportive of his teammates and their personal journeys, and clearly harboring a very profound but respectfully distant crush on Frieren pretty much the entire time they knew each other. This entire story is circling the gravity well that is Himmel the hero. Every timestamp we get in the series is positioned relative to Himmel the hero's death. Even though Frieren didn't really understand a lot of what he was going on about at the time, his memory lives on in her and helps her unravel how to engage with the world rather than standing timelessly apart from it. Because because he loved her when he was alive, she's beginning to understand how love works, guided by his memory and the pieces of himself he left behind so she wouldn't be lonely. At time of making this video, Frieren isn't done. Neither the anime nor the manga has reached its finale. But currently, Frieren's ultimate goal is to reach a legendary land spoken of by her old teacher 1,000 years ago, a place where the souls of the dead gather and lost loved ones can be reunited. I don't know if it's going to turn out to be real, or transformed into some hideous cursed land of necromancy, or just not what it says on the box, but what's very interesting to me about this story is that I don't actually think it'll matter to her. Whether or not she gets a chance to have one last conversation with her dead friends, she's already becoming aware of the impact they've had on her life. They've already lived full lives, and the only things left unresolved are the things that all lives leave unresolved, because the story doesn't end when the hero dies. This story peppers in constant reminders that the arc of the universe is unfathomably long, and one hero's journey is not the center of the universe. There's a magical hero's sword sealed in a magical cave waiting for the one true wielder, and guess what? It wasn't Himmel the hero. The threat it was forged to stop wasn't the Demon King. It's still waiting, apparently. There's an elf adventurer our heroes briefly encounter who none of them recognize, but they learn later he was at one time the traveling companion of a different world-saving human fella literal ages ago. And while there's a statue of him lying around, his name has been entirely lost to history. Time marches on. The world changes, and that world is so much
cool-ass concept, dude.
much larger than the framing device of one adventure story. Frieren as a story seems to operate on the understanding that of course the narrative is haunted. Things always end eventually, and they leave behind relics and recollections and forever change how we see the world even after they're done. The world is changed by our passage through it, and those changes persist even if everyone forgets us. And that's not tragedy, that's the immortal persistence of love. The things we love are changed, and they remain changed even if they forget us. And even if time runs out, it's never too late to follow the tracks where the love passed through. A haunting of the narrative is an acknowledgement that things don't stop mattering after they end. Someone doesn't need to be in the story to profoundly impact it, and while their absence is an open wound, it's also a reminder of their presence and their consequences. It hurts, but it can be the good kind of hurt that reminds you you're alive. I really did set out to make this video mostly about fiction this time, I promise. I can't keep getting away with this. So, yeah.
And that was haunting the narrative. I mean, she did keep it pretty focused on the aspect of haunting the narrative. She did not use examples that I was actually all that familiar with. So, like, I thought there would have been more mention of Ned Stark. I thought Ned Stark would have at least gotten one mention, and she didn't even say his name once. I'm fairly certain she's watched Game of Thrones. I'm fairly certain she's used Game of Thrones as an example before. So I'm kind of surprised it wasn't here. But, yeah. This was a really good trope talk. I don't think it's the best trope talk. I still think Red's trope talk on, I think it was Death. That one really hit me hard. I think that one is still the best one she's done. That's what I'm thinking. One of them made me throw up. I think it was. But yeah, this one was still really good. I feel like I gotta go check out Frieren. But yeah,